Julian Royce didn't want attention that night. Not from cameras, not from clients, not even from the valet who opened his luxury sedan door with the kind of eager smile that came from making just enough to pretend he wasn't broke. Julian gave a brief nod, stepping out quietly, his designer loafers hitting the pavement with the precision of someone used to walking red carpets and boardroom stages. He wore a wool overcoat the color of midnight and a tension in his shoulders he couldn't seem to shake. His son Miles stood a few steps away on the curb, staring down at his shoes like the answers to everything had written themselves across the laces. The boy had grown taller this year, his limbs lankier, more uncertain in their own frame. His posture was slumped, hands folded awkwardly in front of him, as if unsure what to do with the space he occupied. Julian started to speak, paused, then cleared his throat. "Happy birthday, kiddo. You excited for some fried catfish and cornbread?" Miles didn't reply, not even a shrug. Julian sighed softly. That silence, once something he could dismiss as shyness, now felt like a canyon between them. Julian glanced at his phone, resisting the pull of digital obligation. 3 emails flagged, 2 missed calls from the West Coast office. His life, carefully engineered for success, had no blueprint for this moment. He'd read about Miss Lenny's kitchen on a blog for single dads trying to reconnect with their kids. A modest, no-frills eatery praised for its warmth and quiet dignity. Down-home charm, no reservations. Family-owned. A place where the food was slow and the people slower. A space far from curated corporate dinners and polished elegance. Inside, the restaurant smelled like comfort. Butter, sugar, faint notes of peach cobbler and smoked sausage lingered in the air like ghosts of Sunday dinners past. The windows fogged softly, making the light inside golden and blurry. The furniture didn't match. Chairs were chipped but sturdy. Tables were draped in checkered cloths that had seen hundreds of conversations. The floor creaked under every step, as if it remembered every soul who walked across it. At the far end, a small jazz trio played without a stage. Just a corner. A saxophonist leaned into each note like it owed him something. A pianist followed, fingers soft as apologies, and the upright bass kept them honest. Julian gently guided Miles toward an empty table by the window. He pulled out a chair. The boy hesitated. Cerebral palsy made each movement deliberate, slow. Every shift in weight was a quiet negotiation between his mind and muscles. Julian waited without speaking. Finally, Miles sat. Julian unfolded his napkin and placed it in his lap, glancing around. No photographers, no investors, no PR nightmares waiting to unfold. Just people, families, couples, seniors eating alone and smiling anyway. The hum of real life. He looked at the menu, mostly for show. He already knew what he'd order. The blog had made it clear. Get the catfish. Ask for sweet tea with no lemon. Order dessert even if you're full. Miles hadn't opened his menu. His hands rested on the table, fingers twitching. Julian leaned in. "You want to try the mac and cheese? Says it's award-winning." Miles didn't move. Julian tried again, keeping his tone light. "Or maybe the fried chicken. They say it's better than Popeyes, and I know you love Popeyes." Still nothing. The silence deepened. Then came the voice. "Welcome to Miss Lenny's. I'm Jada. I'll be taking care of y'all." Julian looked up. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with her curls tied back in a puff and a tired smile that somehow still felt genuine. Her apron had faint smudges of sauce, but she wore it like armor. There was something in her eyes. Not pity, not performance, but presence. She turned to Miles and beamed. "Birthday boy, huh?" Julian blinked. "I didn't say. Didn't have to. He's got that look, like he's hoping the day will end quietly. But the world won't let him slip away unnoticed. Not tonight. Not with me around." Miles lifted his head. Just a little. Just enough. Jada knelt slightly to get closer to his line of sight, speaking with a softness that seemed to vibrate beneath the surface. "You like music, baby? That saxophone player over there, Mr. Leon, he used to tour with legends. Played behind Etta James in Memphis. Got stories in every note, pain in his breath and honey in his fingers." Miles blinked slowly, absorbing it. His fingers, curled on the table, moved just once. Jada tapped her hip, slow and soft, almost like a metronome only the soul could hear. Miles' fingers tapped back. Julian froze. He hadn't seen that before. "Can you tap that again for me?" she asked, keeping her eyes on him, like he was a headline act. Miles did. She smiled, not broadly, but with sincerity. "You're leading. I'm just following." Julian's chest tightened. Not with pride, with something deeper. Regret, maybe, or awe. He looked around again. No one was staring. No one recognized him. And somehow that made everything feel more real. Jada straightened up slowly. "You two take your time. I'll come back in a few. No rush tonight. We're not that kind of place." And with that, she slipped away, moving between tables like she belonged to them. Julian watched her crouch to speak to a child, refill water before being asked, squeeze an old man's shoulder gently in passing. She wasn't performing. She was being. He turned back to Miles, whose fingers now tapped lightly, a rhythm only he seemed to understand. Julian leaned forward. "You okay, bud?" No answer. "We don't have to stay long. We can eat quick and go. Maybe grab that new Lego set on the way home." Miles moved a hand, slowly pushing the menu aside. "I don't want Legos," he muttered. Julian sat back. That was new. For a long time, Legos were his safe zone. Color-coded bricks of comfort and predictability. They used to build together. Now Julian couldn't remember the last set they finished. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't going to be fixed with toys. Then Jada returned with 2 glasses. "Sweet tea, no lemon. No ice for him. Just like the note said." Julian looked up. "Do you know us?" Jada smiled. "Nope. Just a good guesser. Or maybe I read that same blog you did." Then she turned back to Miles. "You hear that sax? He's talking to you." "Not everyone, just you. Music's funny like that. Knows where to land." Miles tilted his head ever so slightly toward the music. Julian, for once, didn't interrupt. He just listened. To her, to the boy, to the rhythm quietly blooming between them. The saxophone shifted, its melody now softer, deeper, a whisper instead of a declaration. Notes curled in the air like smoke, spiraling slowly around the clink of silverware and low hum of conversation. Jada returned to their table, not with food, but with something more deliberate. A clean cloth in her hand, she knelt beside Miles, gently wiping away a small spill of condensation on the table he hadn't noticed. She didn't rush. She didn't hover. She simply existed in his space like it was sacred. "Hey, sugar," she said casually, her voice low like a secret being passed under a blanket. "You ever danced before?" Miles looked at her like she had asked if he could levitate. "I can't dance," he said plainly. Jada didn't flinch. She smiled, not out of politeness but understanding. "Sure you can. Maybe you just ain't met the right music yet." Julian looked up from his glass, a little surprised to hear Miles speak so directly. It was the most he'd said all evening. Maybe all week. "I have cerebral palsy," Miles added, flat as a fact sheet. "I can't move right." Jada leaned in, eyes soft but unwavering. "Sweetheart, there ain't no wrong way to move when you're honest about how it feels. That's all dancing is, telling the truth with your body." Miles blinked slowly, like he was processing it frame by frame. Jada placed her hand flat on the table. Tap, tap. "Can you do that again for me, baby?" Miles hesitated. His hand hovered. Then, tap, tap. "Look at that," she said with quiet joy. "You already got rhythm in those fingers." Julian leaned forward slightly, his interest sharpening. He used to like music a lot when he was younger, before the therapies. Miles didn't respond, but his eyes stayed locked on Jada. She tapped a new rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Miles followed, his timing off but intent clear. "That's it," she whispered. "You're leading. I'm just following." Julian swallowed hard. There was something sacred in the simplicity of it. No agenda, no structure, just presence. People at nearby tables were beginning to notice, but no one interrupted. Some leaned in. One man lowered his fork slowly, as if afraid to disturb the energy unfolding. Jada stood and glanced toward the jazz trio. The saxophonist, catching the moment, dipped into a lullaby of velvet notes. slow and thick like syrup. She set her tray down on a side ledge, then turned back to Miles. "You hear that?" she said. "That song's asking you a question." Miles squinted, intrigued. "What question?" She smiled. "It's asking if you'll answer back." Julian stiffened. "He doesn't dance." Jada didn't look at him. "I didn't ask him to dance. I asked if he wanted to answer." She leaned back toward Miles, her voice barely above a hum. "Can I show you something? Won't take but a second. You don't have to move a muscle. Just watch." Miles nodded. And then, in that narrow space between their table and the hallway to the kitchen, she began to move. Not like a stage performer. Not like someone showcasing skill. It was simpler. Her shoulders rolled gently. Her arms floated upward like wind-catching fabric. Her feet slid, one step forward, one step back, weightless. It was honest, vulnerable, unrehearsed. Julian held his breath. She raised one hand, palm open. Miles watched her. His own hand twitched. Slowly he lifted it, fingers trembling, and raised it halfway. Jada mirrored him. They stood like that for a long moment. Him seated, her standing, hands lifted across a space filled with more than air. They were building a rhythm neither of them had rehearsed but both instinctively knew. Then, tap, tap. Jada echoed it. Tap, tap. Then she tapped once and waited. Miles tilted his head. Tap. She moved, a single sway, letting that one beat guide her next step. The saxophonist bent his notes around them, layering his sound over Miles' taps like a painter blending shadows into highlights. Julian could feel the room stretch. Time slowed. Nobody was talking anymore. He wasn't the richest man in the room anymore. That title now belonged to a waitress in worn sneakers and a boy with tired limbs. But then the spell broke. From the kitchen, a crash. Sharp, sudden, a plate, maybe two. Voices raised briefly. Miles flinched, recoiling. His hand dropped to his lap. His eyes darted to the floor. He was small again. Closed off, like the moment had never happened. Julian leaned forward, panic tightening his voice. "Hey, hey, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong." Jada turned quickly, kneeling beside the table again. "Just a clumsy cook," she whispered. "Happens all the time. You did perfect." Miles looked at her, not fully convinced. She hovered her hand near his, close but not touching. "You did something real brave just now. Real honest. That matters." Julian cleared his throat. He's not used to attention." Jada nodded. "Neither am I." And for the first time she looked at Julian not as a customer, but as a man trying not to break. "I saw him watching the music," she said, "and I remembered what that felt like." Julian blinked. What felt like? Wanting to move, but not knowing if you're allowed. He sat back, stunned. That was the first time anyone had said something that felt true. Not medical, not analytical, just true. Jada stood and wiped her hands on her apron. She waved gently toward the jazz trio. The saxophonist nodded back, an old nod, a shared memory. Julian stared at her. "You used to dance." She smiled, wistful. "Still do. Not in the way I used to. But yeah, studied modern. Taught ballet in Birmingham." "So why are you waiting tables?" Her smile dimmed. "Life got expensive. My mom got sick. My little boy keeps outgrowing his shoes. This pays the rent." Julian lowered his eyes. There was no comeback to that. "Doesn't mean I stopped dancing," she added. "Just means I had to learn how to do it while carrying plates." She glanced back at Miles. "And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I get to teach someone new. Even if it's just for 2 minutes between orders." Miles gave a tiny smile. Not big, but real. The pad in Jada's apron buzzed. She pulled it out, glanced down. "All right, y'all. I better go before the kitchen thinks I got kidnapped by the birthday table." As she turned, Julian surprised himself. "Wait." She looked back. "You ever thought about teaching again?" She raised an eyebrow. "Every day. Doesn't pay the bills." Julian nodded slowly. "Maybe it could. If the right program existed." Jada squinted. "What do you mean?" Julian rubbed the back of his neck. "Not sure yet, but What if there was a place where someone like you could teach and someone like Miles could learn? Not out of charity, not on a checklist, just because it matters. She didn't answer right away. Just stared, trying to decide if this was real. You a non-profit guy? Julian almost laughed. I build software for hedge funds and missile systems. Her expression didn't change. I'm not the good guy in this story, he said. I missed his first steps for a tech conference. I don't know what he dreams about, but I saw what you did tonight, and it worked better than anything I've ever paid for. Jada looked down. You don't even know me. True, Julian said, but I know my son, and tonight, he let someone follow him. They both turned to Miles, who was gently tapping his plate in time with the upright bass. Jada's voice was soft. What you're talking about? It's big. Bigger than me. Julian nodded. Then let's build it with you. Julian Royce hadn't stopped thinking about that night at Miss Lenny's, the way Miles had raised his hand, however unsteady. The way Jada had followed his rhythm like it was gospel. And most of all, the way his son had smiled. Small, brief, but real. It haunted him in the best possible way. 6 days later, Julian stood outside a weathered brick building just off the main road in Auburn. A former gymnasium now vacant, the place had high ceilings, old wood floors scuffed by decades of footsteps, and a stubborn front door that groaned every time it opened. It was perfect. Not in the way Julian usually defined the word. Not polished, not sleek, not investor-ready. But it had bones, history, a heartbeat that just needed tuning. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting fractured beams onto the floor. He walked slowly, almost reverently, imagining what the space could be. In his mind, he saw mirrors along the far wall, a shelf with speakers and instruments, mats stacked neatly, kids moving not in sync but in truth, no two alike, no one left out. He dialed the number he had saved under a single name, Jada. Hello? Can you meet me? He asked. There's something I want to show you. When Jada arrived, she stepped out of her old Honda, wearing a faded hoodie and sneakers with worn soles. Her expression was unreadable as she stared at the building. What is this? She asked. Julian opened the door. A maybe. Come see. Inside, Jada walked the space in silence. Her eyes moved slowly across every surface. The corners, the light, the floor. She ran her hand along a cracked window frame. There are no bars, no mirrors. Not yet. But can you see it? She stood in the middle of the room, eyes closed for a full minute. Then, yeah, I see it. Over the next several weeks, they met almost daily. Julian brought architects, city permits, contractors. Jada brought notebooks full of sketches, lesson plans, community ideas, and stories of children who needed a place where their bodies weren't problems to be fixed. Their worlds, so different, began to blend. Julian learned to listen more than speak. Jada learned to trust a man who could have disappeared after one generous tip. They chose the name together, the Movement Room, because it wasn't just about dancing. It was about permission to take up space, to move without explanation, to lead. One evening, Julian brought Miles to see the progress. The walls had been painted a soft ivory. The wood floors had been sanded and sealed. The mirrors hadn't arrived yet, but music played softly through temporary speakers. Jada had invited a few volunteers, young dancers, an old friend from Birmingham who used to choreograph community shows, a retired therapist with a sharp sense of humor. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Miles walked slowly through the space. His hand brushed against the wall. He stopped near the center and looked at Jada. Is this yours? He asked. She smiled. It's ours. Miles nodded. Then he did something Julian hadn't seen in months. He stepped forward. Just one step, but on his own. No prompting, no coaxing. Jada watched him like he was a sunrise. The week before opening, they held a soft launch. Just friends, a few families from the neighborhood, a handful of curious kids. Jada stood at the front of the room, barefoot, her voice steady but warm. This space doesn't care if you move perfectly. It cares that you move honestly. If your foot drags, let it. If your arm trembles, let it. There's no wrong way to tell the truth. She turned to the kids. You don't need to follow. You need to lead. Show us your way. We'll follow. Julian watched from the back, heart thudding. He glanced at Miles, who was tapping his fingers to a rhythm only he could hear. Then the boy looked at his father. Can I go? Julian nodded. Miles stepped into the circle. Jada waited. Miles raised his hand, opened his palm. Tap, tap. She echoed him, and the movement room officially began. Later that night, after everyone had left and the lights dimmed, Julian stood beside Jada in the empty studio. He held out a photo. Miles in the middle of the room, arms raised, eyes focused, smile crooked. Can I hang this? She looked at it, then looked at him. Only if we get one of you beside him. He laughed softly. I can't dance. That's what he said too. They stood there for a long time. No music, no movement, just stillness. And in that stillness, something beautiful was already taking shape. The movement room had been open for 3 months. Word had spread, not through ads or press releases, but through whispers between parents and grocery store lines. Therapists with too many patients and too few resources, and children who came home with something unfamiliar in their eyes. Confidence. Every week, more kids showed up. Some used wheelchairs, some barely spoke. Others just didn't fit into the boxes school or society tried to force them into. And every week, Jada stood at the front, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, telling them the same thing. There is no wrong way to move, as long as it's yours. Julian had changed too. He still worked, still flew to meetings, but his calendar now had a sacred, unmovable block. Thursday afternoons. That was Miles' class. He sat in the back each time, arms crossed, eyes soft, watching his son not just participate, but lead. One Thursday, Julian arrived early. The room was already buzzing. Kids were helping lay out mats. A little girl named Yasmin, nonverbal, autistic, and obsessed with tambourines, giggled uncontrollably as she spun in circles. An older boy, Marcus, tall and silent, moved like water, helping another child stretch. Julian found Jada by the supply closet, stacking scarves. This isn't a studio anymore, he said. It's a revolution, she grinned. We just gave them permission. They took care of the rest. He looked around. We should do something bigger, showcase what's happening here. Let people know. Jada raised an eyebrow. You mean a performance? Julian nodded. A recital, but not polished, not choreographed to perfection. Just them, in their rhythm. Jada thought for a moment. Only if they lead it. No adult decides who dances or what song plays. They build it. Deal, Julian said. They called it Let Me Lead, a movement night. Flyers were handwritten by the kids. The stage was nothing but an open floor and a few borrowed lights. Parents brought folding chairs. A jazz trio volunteered to play live. The room overflowed before it began. Miles opened the night. He stood at the center, one hand raised, palm open. Then, tap, tap, the saxophonist answered. Then came Yasmin, shaking her tambourine like it was a magic wand. Marcus danced without ever lifting his feet, his upper body telling stories his mouth never had. One girl read a poem in sign language. Another boy crawled across the floor and rolled into a spin that left the room silent. It was beautiful, unpolished, wild, honest. At the end, the parents stood and clapped, then cried, some for joy, some because for the first time their children had been seen. Julian stood beside Jada, heart full. You did this, he whispered. She shook her head, eyes glassy. Number they did. We just made room. Then she turned to him. You know what I see when I look at this room? Julian smiled. What? The future, and it's louder, braver, messier, and more loving than we ever imagined. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Jada found a note taped to the mirror. It was written in block letters, messy but proud. Thank you for letting me be loud. Thank you for letting me lead. Miles. She held the note to her chest. Across the room, Julian stood with his phone in hand. He wasn't texting or calling. He was recording. Just the quiet room, the scuff marks on the floor, the walls humming with what had just happened. He turned to Jada. Let's build another one. In Birmingham or Montgomery, wherever kids are still being told to sit down and stay still, Jada didn't hesitate. We start Monday because sometimes the biggest act of love isn't giving advice, it's making space. And sometimes the most powerful revolution doesn't march, it dances.